Welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast, where we visit with leaders who are shaping, innovating, and disrupting technical education. People who are not afraid to think differently, not afraid to try something new, all with the goal of securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. You know, when we think about artificial intelligence, a lot of us think about companies like Netflix and Amazon and X and others that are doing things at scale, investing billions and billions of dollars in the future of AI. The truth of the matter is, though, as we travel the country and travel the globe, meeting people that are doing amazing things in machine learning and artificial intelligence, to me, the most interesting story are those small to mid-sized companies, startups, emerging technologies that are finding ways to employ artificial intelligence and put it to work. And many experts will tell you that this is the future of artificial intelligence. It's not necessarily the billion-dollar companies doing this work. It's the companies that are finding really amazing use cases and figuring out a way to leverage artificial intelligence. Today, we have just such a company joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I am so happy to introduce the co-founder and the chief executive officer of a company called Ren. His name is Canay Deniz. And Canay, it is awesome to have you with us today on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
So we have to start out. You and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about your technology. I'm actually one of many early adopters of the work. So full disclosure, I'm just a huge fan of your business and what you're doing. And I'm a beneficiary of the technology that our audience is going to learn about today. But let's start out by just learning a little bit about Ren.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's awesome to have you and your team on Ren, Matt. We're obviously excited and great to chat with you. Look, so the problem we're tackling is on the relationship management front. The problem is when you are a very well-connected person, you know a lot of people, it's extremely hard to stay on top of everything that's going on in your network. But once you've actually experienced the magic that can happen when you reach out to the right person at the right time within the right context, you know that your network is probably full of those opportunities. But oftentimes it'll feel very random to discover such an opportunity. So what we're tackling is, especially for people that are very well connected, we understand your goals. We build a technology that understands your goals, understands your entire universe of contacts, and then starts reading basically everything, right? The entire internet. We have the broadest coverage in the English-speaking market. And whenever we detect something that we believe is relevant for you to know about the people and companies that you care about, we tell you about it in a very quick and easy manner. And we also help you reach out in an impactful way. So in a nutshell, high level, that's what we've built.
What inspired you toward this, Canay? Just give our audience a little bit of a sense for your background, where you came from. I know as a lot of people, they're looking at AI, they're thinking about how does somebody even get into this, especially at maybe a little bit smaller scale initially. So how did you find your way to this?
My background is in engineering. I studied electrical engineering and industrial engineering at a university called ETH Zurich out of Switzerland. That's where I grew up. I joined the startup afterwards, running first a machine learning team. And then I moved to the US in 2014 to New York to start that company's US operations. So I did that for a couple more years. And then at the end, I ended up running marketing, which, at a startup, that was a startup that grew to, 100 people and raised a bunch of money all the way to Series C. So I ran that for about 5 years. And then at that point, I stepped out. It was time for something new after having done 5 years at a startup, as the first job out of college. That's relatively long. So I have multiple hats on. And then ultimately, I ended up bumping into a really interesting group of people. Now, and that's the start of Ren. But if I take, a couple steps back, my life is full of those moments, those magical moments when the right people come together at the right time in the right context. And then my life took on a different trajectory. And the way Ren started was in a very similar way. It wasn't, me and my co-founders sitting in a garage coming up with an idea and doing your classic California, Silicon Valley style startup. I was, quote unquote, randomly introduced to a really interesting group of people. We started talking about their problems that they have. These are all very senior operators across different industries. They told me about, the problems of not being on top of your relationships, how it's really important for them to give back to the people that they care about. And once we understood that, there isn't really something that exists like this, and we also understood that there's a very broad group of people, it's a very huge market. So we decided to kick things off and start this business. And that group of people was also the original investors of the company, and that allowed me to kick things off right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we started in 2020.
So when you say that there's nothing really that exists like this, I think to paraphrase or come pretty close to the way that you describe it, help our audience understand what is this? What is Ren? How does it work? If they're engaging with the technology, what does that feel like? Tell the story.
So what Ren is it lives where you are. So it can be as simple as an email you get every morning. It also is an app on your phone. It also is a dashboard on your browser. Depending on where you are, that's where Ren is. At first, onboarding needs to be super fast and easy. So you get started signing up, creating your account, telling Ren a little bit about you. This takes about 60 seconds. It'll ask you things like, where do your most relevant relationships, work, in industries? What is your job? How long have you been in the business, etc. From that, our algorithm can already assume a couple of things, right? Then it'll ask you, where do your most relevant contacts live, right? Especially if you've been in the game for a while, your contacts tend to be a mess, right? You have multiple devices, multiple email accounts, calendars, CRMs, probably spreadsheets lying around somewhere. So we made it extremely simple to connect all of that with Ren and tell Ren about your entire universe of contacts. So it takes about 2 to 5 minutes to set up, and then you're already going. And then afterwards, it feels like a consumer app. It feels like TikTok or Instagram, where you just scroll through relevant news about the people and companies that you care about. If you're a sales professional, that will be your prospects, your clients, your key contacts that can introduce you to such. Every morning you get an email that tells you exactly what you need to know on that day. If you've connected your calendar, it'll look at who you're meeting that day and give you background and recent news about those folks. Afterwards, it'll tell you, here's the people that are mentioned in the news, or they've said something interesting. And then the bottom portion is tracking all of your key companies, such as prospects, customers, portfolio companies, investors, LPs, depending on what field of business you're in. So it's an intelligence tool. It is extremely simple to use. One of our design principles is, when in doubt, simplify. So that's what we're trying to maintain. Now, the platform itself is actually geared towards enterprise. So our customers are actually businesses who are buying licenses for their executive sales professionals. But once the individuals get on, it very much feels like a very slick and easy, app.
Absolutely. And so as a user of the technology myself, I can just tell you that you're right. That 2 to 5 minute range, or 3 to 5 minutes, that's all it took to get set up. And literally in a matter of minutes, you aggregate all of that into a full database of an individual's contacts. And then to your point, you're now going out to just a tremendous number of different news sources and returning information on what's happening in an individual's network in almost real time fashion. It's amazing how quickly information will show up on one's network once a news source has identified somebody, written an article about them, and so on. All of this is happening using generative AI. Help our audience understand, how is Ren adapting and leveraging this technology in the work that you do?
So if we just take the umbrella term AI, there's 3 parts to it. The first and most important part is, think of it as a noise filter. We read millions of news every hour, and we filter that for anything that is relevant to you and your network, right? That requires, all sorts of NLP, natural language processing type techniques that we're applying. But that is really something that's more math with language rather than directly generative AI. Then there's a portion that is, pretty classical machine learning that learns from how you use the application. Which news do you react to? When do you actually action a piece of information? Who are the people that you're clicking on? What types of sources are you clicking on? Any action that you take on Ren trains the algorithm to become better and better, more and more relevant over time. And then the third piece, once we've shown you relevant context about a relevant person, we take you one step further, and that's where the generative AI piece comes in. We help you generate a contextual, personalized message based on the news that it finds, just with one click of a button. And then it'll write something like, hey, I just saw you guys release this new product. That sounds great. We could be, very interested in this. Let's catch up. And then you can go in and edit that message. But it gives you basically a starting draft that makes you much faster in doing this kinds of outreach.
There was a recent study that was done by a couple of students at MIT that showed that when individuals were using artificial intelligence and generative AI at work, on average, their time to complete simple tasks it was 37% faster than people that weren't using generative AI. And I can tell you in the case of Ren, you think about finding a news article on a contact, drafting an email to that individual saying, "Hey, I saw this article. Congratulations, great work. Let me know how I can help." Sending that email, that could take a tremendous amount of time. And with the Ren tool, that email being drafted for you, and I like to point out that you then go back and edit that, right? So it may not just necessarily capture exactly the message that you want, but you go back as a human being and turn it into your tone, maybe change a word or two. It's a personalized message to that contact, but you're producing it so much more quickly, which is a huge benefit. I think is just the time savings and how much more you can stay in touch with your network and take advantage of those contacts. I think you and I took advantage of a mutual contact, though. The way that we met was somewhat serendipitous. I have a good friend by the name of Bill Berrien. Bill's a former guest here on the Tech Ed podcast, and Bill had suggested probably a year and a half ago, "Hey, these guys in New York are doing some really, really cool stuff. You should check it out." That's how you and I got connected. And I know a little bit of the whole idea behind Ren is to take that serendipitous contact and really systematize it, make it more automatic. So tell us, you touched on that a little bit earlier, but tell us a little bit about how you're systematizing serendipity with Ren.
Yeah, I mean, even personally for me, right? This is very much part of why I deeply care about our mission here. I was born in a refugee camp, and now I get to do this on your podcast. So between where things started for me and where they currently are, and hopefully where they keep going, there's quite a leap there. The way this happened is at individual moments in my life. My life took on a different trajectory, and every single time, and typically you would label that part hard work and part luck. I think a lot of us, maybe all of us, can point out to individual moments in life. I'm sure you can, where just the right people came together at the right time in the right context, and something magical happened from that. Now, of course, you had to prepare for it. Of course, you had to work hard to get into those moments. But there is this element of luck, right? And I've had this conversation with many people, and at this point, we have all the way to Fortune 500 CEOs that are on Ren, and all of them have these kinds of stories that they can talk about. And every single time when we talk about luck and how they feel very lucky in the sense that how they got to where they are, they break down luck in that exact same way, that same three components: right people, right time, right context. So even the way I became co-founder and CEO at Ren is part of that, those three elements coming together again. So what we did is we made this part of our mission. We said, systematizing luck, it seems contradictory, right? Because luck intrinsically is random. But once you break it down into those three components, all of a sudden you have three areas that you can augment with technology. Right people is lots of data, lots of databases, CRMs, Google Contacts, Outlook Contacts, calendars, et cetera, et cetera. At least in the professional world, it's relatively straightforward. Right time, again, is automatable or at least to some degree systematizable. You just try to read everything, right? You tap into all of the sources that are out there, APIs, news aggregators, directly partner with news sources, which is what we do, and read everything and try to understand and analyze everything. And then the last part, the right context, is you take what you find, you combine it with your relationships with your network, and then you help put that context into a message that then the user can send out. So combining those three things, you send out those messages, or you react to important moments in the lives of the people you care about. And who knows what happens after that. What we do know is people on Ren, they book more meetings, they discover more opportunities, and they win more deals. They make more money for their companies, which right now is the area that we're focusing on, sales. We're focusing on sales enablement. But we do have a broad range of people on Ren, from executives to people in government to even just starters in their career that are trying to progress in their career, and they value their relationships. They want to strengthen them already early on in their career. So it's nice to see this broad range of people who are getting value from Ren.
A broad range of people, including CEOs, including executives, including people in government, including people who are just starting out in their careers. I want to go a little deeper on the relationship part of that, Janai. But before we do that, you mentioned something in that last answer about reading everything, about really going out and partnering with news sources and reading everything. Tell us a little bit about what is everything. What is Ren going out to when you're gathering information on someone's network? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're already inundated with, I would say, is advertising and user generated content. I think all the social media platforms, they offer plenty of that. So one of the things that we wanted to categorically exclude was that portion that we already have, but we wanted to focus on the broader media. And when I say the broader media, we're looking at over 350,000 sources to date. This is going from mainstream media to hyper local news sources to government specific sources or industry specific sources. And the reason why we're going so broad is some of the best success stories that we have are actually not coming from, hey, I saw this thing on the front page of the New York Times, but it's, man, my prospect just won the local marathon and this was published in some super local paper. I reached out and this guy has been ignoring me for 8 months, and I just booked the meeting after being 24 hours on your app. So it's that kind of stuff where like we just read everything, because when you mentioned people who are leveraging AI at work, they save a lot of time. In our case, this is even more extreme, because especially sales professionals, they spend over 12 hours a week just scrolling through LinkedIn, reading a whole bunch of newsletters, doing lots of research, and yet they still only scratch the surface of everything that they could read. You cannot read millions of news every hour. That's just not how the human brain works. So we do that for you. And with that, not only are we saving you time on, reading and writing messages, but we are reading so much more than you could possibly read in a year. We do that in a day. And from that, we open up opportunities for you. So that's why we go so broad in everything that we're covering in our news sources.
You're going to love this. I have a company that I'm associated with that uses Ren extensively. One of the individuals was going through his Ren feed, saw this article about a supplier of his that had introduced a brand new product in the Pacific Northwest. And the supplier had gone to a little like Kiwanis Club meeting and talked with his little Kiwanis Club about this new product he was working on. And the tiny little town newspaper picked up that story, and it ended up in my friend's Ren feed, right? So he all of a sudden he gets notification of this new product that his supplier's introducing that he didn't even know about. He's like, this is the coolest thing in the world. He takes the article and posts it on LinkedIn. And like 2 hours later, his supplier is calling him and saying, how in the world did you know about that? We haven't noticed and we haven't told anybody about that. And so it's just a perfect example of really when you're going out to 350,000 different news sources every day and gathering all that information, how you're going to learn things about your network that you would never, ever know otherwise. And you can use that information to tremendous leverage, both in terms of saving time and also creating all kinds of opportunities for your business. One of the things that I worry about, though, Janai, when we start thinking about AI in business, think about all this information that we can gather on our network. You almost worry a little bit sometimes that maybe those relationships become a little less deep, that they become shallower because you're not building that intense personal relationship with a member of your network. Do you see it that way, or does Ren actually do the opposite?
First of all, I agree with that general notion. And second of all, that's why Ren exists. I think, in a lot of ways, social media made us more antisocial. I think, hitting the like button makes us feel social sometimes, or commenting on a post, but oftentimes that is more of a broadcasting and then reacting kind of interaction. That's why we're actually focusing more on the one-to-one relationship. Ren is not a broadcasting tool. You can't post on Ren. We want to make sure you don't miss the important moments in the lives of the people you care about. Now, the very word Ren actually comes from the Confucian virtue of benevolence, of altruism. And the original idea behind everybody who started Ren and invested in Ren in the early days, it was coming from a place of, I want to know what's happening in the lives of the people I care about so that I can go and help, right? So you can only do that if you know what's going on in people's lives. And in this world, we're all busy, we're all distracted, we're all tired. It's very hard to stay on top. You do miss people. You do, it does happen that 6 months go by and you haven't caught up with the person you wanted to catch up. So we kind of want to augment that. And the entire purpose of Ren is to counter that, to make you reach out, to make it really easy to reach out, to make it effortless to reach out to more people than you usually do, and to strengthen those relationships and keep those relationships from depreciating and, going away.
So it really is, it almost feels like a mission, right? I love the way that you explain that we're enabling people to keep track of what's happening, the important events in the lives of their network, and then offering assistance in whatever ways, or congratulating them and making them feel even better about whatever accomplishment that they managed to have in their life. And so it really is, used properly, an opportunity to improve people's lives more than anything else. One of the concerns, though, I think that folks have when they, you start thinking about somebody with a huge network. I learned a lesson this morning while reading the Wall Street Journal, and one of the ways to figure out how many people you know or how many people are in your network. This just fascinated me, by the way. They said the average person has 611 people that they know personally, and the way that you can figure out how many people you know is by counting the number of, in the English speaking world, the number of Michaels that you know personally. And they said Michaels make up about 1% of the population. And if you take that number and multiply it by 100, that's how many people you
Yeah,
know. And it's actually been proven. They did a study on that, which I thought was absolutely fascinating as we're recording that. That
interesting.
showed up in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Just a really, really simple calculation. But you start thinking about the huge network. I can tell you, I know a lot more than 8 Michaels. And my network personally is probably significantly more than 611. You get all of those people, and some of them are newsmakers, and you're going out to 350,000 different news sources every day, gathering all that information. It can almost in some ways create a deluge of information. How does Ren make sure that the items showing up in someone's feed are actually relevant to their world and not just the noise that we might get about our network or the companies they work for and so on?
Yeah, and that's the second reason why Ren exists. The median user that comes on Ren actually comes in with about 2,500 connections, and Dunbar's number is 150, is the number of relationships they can meaningfully manage. So, for maybe the average consumer, this might be, it is what it is. But if your job, your KPIs, your goals depend on the quality of how you can manage those relationships, then you need help. That there's no doubt. And a lot of people do have help in the form of dozens of humans that are helping you manage all of those relationships and many, many expensive systems and so forth. So a way in which I describe Ren actually quite often is, think of it as the world's biggest noise filter. That is to some degree a thing that I want to build. So we're starting off with the news, and we're starting off with supporting sales and relationships, but ultimately the world is only getting noisier and noisier. And I think with the addition of generative AI, we're probably going towards even more noise, where we can't even really distinguish between, what's relevant, what isn't, what's real and what isn't. So with that, you said deluge of information, it's all the more important that you understand what should I pay attention to and what shouldn't I pay attention to. All of it, everything that's going on to some degree is a battle for our attention. And the tool that we've built with Ren, and that's why we don't do advertising. It's not, we don't sell data. This is a tool that is designed to help people focus on what matters. And our algorithm determines who should we show you information about based on which kinds of news, based on when we showed you something about that person last, based on your past interactions, such as, have you had a meeting anytime in the last 3 months? Is a meeting coming up in the next month? So we look at a lot of data. We look at a lot of your environment to determine when do we show you which piece of information. Which, if you go on Ren, it probably feels pretty natural and organic, because it's just like alert after alert. And we also let you influence that feed. We let you hit the thumbs up, the thumbs down. We let you mute stuff about people or companies that are just currently not relevant, or we let you upvote and VIP people that you find more relevant. So within 72 hours or so, your feed should be pretty sharp, And what's the comparison? The comparison is all the other news feeds out there. And based on our customers and our user feedback, we are by far the highest signal to noise amongst the alternatives.
And over time, to put it simply, Ren is getting smarter and smarter in understanding personal preferences, to a greater degree, in such a way that what it is returning to the user has even more value. And the more that they interact with the tool, the more value it's going to have. I can tell the tool has value to a great many people, because your marketing, by the way, has really stepped up and been impressive here the last 6 months. I see regular posts now of recognizable people working for recognizable companies saying, I'm using Ren. Here's how I'm using it. Here's why I'm using it. Here's the benefit that it's had in our organization. And so those personal testimonials are just absolutely incredibly valuable in terms of driving value for your organization and helping people understand the value proposition. Why is it that all these people are so drawn and so successful with your tool? What do you think the secret sauce is there?
We're all struggling with a couple of trends that seem to be only getting more intense. One is the one that you mentioned, which is the signal to noise problem. I think we're inundated with information, and it's only getting more. We're constantly on screens. There's a million things all the time that you could be trying. And, you know, I think also enterprises are struggling with this. They're just like, they already have a tech stack of 12 tools, and I'm sure there's another 20 that they could be using, but like getting people to use even just one or two or three of them is a challenge. So one is just the deluge of information, the abundance of available tools. But what's really missing is something that makes sense of all of that information, and in a way that is just super simple and fast to consume, right? With Ren, technically, you don't even have to use another tool. You just get an email in the morning that tells you, here's the stuff you need to know. We wanted it to be this simple because we deeply understand our user and our customer. Again, I think, and this is not in a insulting way, I very often feel that way as well. I'm busy, tired, and distracted. I think we all battle those three core challenges of our time. So during a time and in a world where there's so much stuff going on and we're all so busy, but the thing we actually value is our relationships, and the way that the way we actually are getting the most ROIs from investing in those relationships, we knew that the tool needs to be super fast and easy, and it needs to be high signal to low noise. So those are the things that we fully invested in. And Ren is very much an iceberg kind of product. What you see is just a very tip of the iceberg, and it feels super simple and easy. We packaged everything into the back end as much as we can, all of the intelligence, all the processes, and it's quite tricky. We have quantum physics PhDs working on those algorithms to get you the right news, the right alerts at the right time. It's a tricky problem that we're solving. I think the reason why people are attracted to it is, one, it's super fast and easy to try, and once you try it, it takes about 5 to 15 minutes to get your first aha moment. And oftentimes, people who are already in a trying kind of mood, they'll do like whatever, they'll just hit the send button or hit the reach out button. And then once they send it to someone that's been ignoring them for 5 or 6 months, and all of a sudden they get a response back, they're thinking, wow, this is pretty powerful. So we have testimonials from very senior, for example, commercial real estate brokers, which again, this is an industry heavily relationship driven, that are saying, I got on this tool, I sent 3 messages sort of just to try it out, and I just booked 3 meetings. This is unreal, right? That's one of my favorites. We have other folks who are saying they've actually, on a personal side too, they've seen stuff about old college roommates doing amazing things. We've had someone saying that they had lost touch with somebody completely. They saw that person was promoted. They reached out, and that actually led to a $3 million business deal afterwards. So it's things like that where the more measurable it is, of course, the easier it is for us to go and sell the technology. But I also live for those things where somebody lands a job because they've seen something, or somebody, was able to help somebody land a deal. Like more on the altruistic side, there's a couple of really beautiful stories.
Well, and it really is a way of just leveraging your own impact on the earth, right? I mean, the more of those relationships that get deeper, they get more beneficial because of the fact that you and your co-founders came up with really cool technology. That's got to just be tremendously gratifying.
My co-founder and one of my first investors, Mike Hayes, he actually he's written a book called Never Enough, and he said one of his next books is going to be all the cool stuff that happened because of Ren, all the magical moments that were created. So we're very excited about collecting all of these success stories of people, not just in the business world, not just in sales, but across life. And we do believe that is going to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned, this group of people that are working on this really cool technology on the back end. So obviously you get to come on the podcast, talk about all the great things that your team is doing. We have a lot of young people that listen to this podcast, and as much as we're dedicated to technical education, as we're thinking about those folks, what kind of careers exist in addition to what Janai gets to do every day, kind of behind the scenes, what as students are thinking about their futures, who's doing all this really cool work?
Yeah, it's obviously a mix of things, right? We have from the stuff that you see is app developers, iOS developers, front end engineers, designers, UI UX experts, and then on the back end you have your DevOps, your back end engineers, and your full stack engineers, and so forth. And on the algorithmic side, we have our physicists and pure mathematicians who are fiddling with the math with language, is what I like to call it, or what Felipe, our head of AI, likes to call it. My CTO and co-founder has an interesting background. He actually, after high school, he went and became a police officer in Zurich in the I don't know what you call it, but like the crime fighting force. And he did that for 5 years. And then after that, he actually decided to go to my university, ETH Zurich, and study mechanical engineering. And just a very funky background too. His name is Lionel, and he's sort of the full stack engineer that also has a deep understanding of industrial machines. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of people who primarily just like numbers, like technology, like software, and generally just solving hard problems. I'm a big believer in learning math. Right. Regardless of what you do, I feel like math is the language of nature that you should probably learn at some point to some degree. Even though a lot of people will think, "Oh, I'm never going to use this in real life." I think that's deeply wrong. I think you will in some way, shape, or form.
I love the idea of, there isn't just one pathway into a role like this or into a company like this, and you're hiring and recruiting a broad array of different backgrounds and different experiences. I think that's the future of the economy. I agree with you that math is important. I'm also excited about all the applied ways that we can teach it anymore, and you don't necessarily have to just sit in front of a book or in front of a whiteboard and watch somebody perform it. There's all kinds of great ways to learn applied math, and so the future for education is really exciting. The future for our students is really exciting. The future for technology is really exciting. And I think a lot of us, we pay attention to what the big Fortune 500 companies are doing, but I'm still a believer, as I mentioned in the intro, that a lot of the innovation in AI and machine learning is going to come from those small to mid-sized companies that are addressing specific use cases in the same way that Ren is. So to that end, I know you don't exist in a vacuum. You keep your eye on the market. What are some of those companies or some of those organizations that are doing really cool stuff in this space that our audience may not be as familiar with? What are you keeping your eye on for the next several years in terms of evolving technologies and companies that are mastering it?
Yeah, and before I go into that, I wanted to also just commend you on what you're doing with this podcast and generally in your life. I think is amazing. I'm a big supporter, and I hope to support it continuously beyond this podcast as well. It's obviously awesome work that you're doing.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, we keep an eye on the market, of course, both from a competitive analysis perspective as well as what are the big guys doing, what is happening in the open source community. In terms of the foundational science, there's a lot going on, and we're not in that space. Although we are keeping a very close eye on it because from the tools that have become really popular to what's happening now with open source models and large language models and so forth. I think that's going to be a game changer. It's going to change a lot of things on the cybersecurity front, the data privacy front too, which of course we are as buttoned up as it gets, and we are keeping a very close eye on. We're selling to enterprises, and you have to be very diligent when it comes to IT security and data privacy and so forth. So it's basically just an entire new platform upon which entire industries will be built. I'm fairly convinced of that. Uh, yeah, it's an endless array of things that are happening. But I think keeping an eye on what the big guys are doing, the Facebooks of the world, the open AIs of the world, of course. I mean, now Elon has announced his new LLM, and anyone who sits on top of unique proprietary data will have a very strong reason to either develop their own LLM or fine tune an open source LLM and start doing really fun stuff with it. And that's what we're observing. So I think it's going to be some really interesting use cases coming out of that across all industries.
For sure. I was listening to Andrew Ng talk a little bit. We're nationally recognized, internationally recognized expert on artificial intelligence. Talk a little bit about applications in small to mid-sized companies. The one of the examples that he offered was, look, I could be a small town, takeout pizza company, and I've got all of this data that I'm not using. I know who orders what pizza on what day based upon what weather, what events are going on in the town or the city that I'm in, what time of the year it is, what day of the week it is, what time of the month it is, all of this information that those individuals have that they're in most cases they're not doing anything at all with, because they've never even had a tool that they could analyze that with. Now you can really, to his point, drive to a time where a small business owner, such as a takeout pizza chain, could say, all right, we know exactly what pizzas to make at what time, what materials to order, during what time of the year, and drive tremendous amount of waste out of their system, and also drive tremendous customer response into their system. I think, to your point, anybody who's sitting on data, whether it's a huge amount of data or even a more limited set of data, is going to come up with all kinds of great ways in the coming years to use that data to improve efficiency, customer experience, profitability, all the things that we in business are looking to improve day in and day out. I would love to learn a little bit, Janai, from your experience in doing this. If I'm a company that's just starting to figure out, hey, AI is going to transform my space. I'm not quite sure how it's going to happen, but I know it's happening. What are some of those factors that our audience who are in any organization, an educational institution, a small business, what have you, what should they be looking for in terms of determining whether an AI based platform or solution is right for them?
I'm actually of the opinion, maybe a little bit counter to what might be expected here from from a guy like me, but I'm actually not a big fan of focusing on the tool. I'm a big fan of what are you trying to achieve. If AI lends itself well to solve your problem, then absolutely, right? Figure out, what data to use, which model to use, how to apply it. Do you need engineers? Which talent to bring on, and then go on that mission and that journey. But before knowing what even your goal is, if your goal is to use a tool, I think that's the wrong approach to begin. I think, as with anything, AI is a tool, and I cannot remember when the last time when the tool was the solution. There's lots of hammers out there looking for a nail that ended up, never really materializing. So, long story short, I think if you're an educational organization, say, and what is your goal? Our goal is to have our students achieve better results on tests. All right, cool. Let's start with the test results and see, okay, where are people failing? So you still have to do the work. You still have to actually spend time thinking about the problem. And then what AI is or offers, or what some of these new models out there are offering you, is a way to much faster analyze and synthesize a lot of text-based data in the case of LLMs, for example. When it comes to computer vision, you're going to be able to analyze a lot more, imaging-based information. So, but it still will require smart people in the organization that know the problem, that know the business, sitting down, figuring out what's the problem that we're trying to solve, what outcome do we want to achieve, and then choose the tool and the method and the process accordingly to achieve that outcome.
I agree with you, by the way. And I spent 15 years before anybody knew what artificial intelligence was, or even that it was a thing, traveling all over the country, assisting manufacturers on Kaizen or continuous improvement events. And one of the things that we would say is, people would say, well, we need to do more CI events. And the answer is, well, you maybe do, but what is the problem you're trying to solve? We don't do CI for the sake of doing CI. I don't do a Kaizen event for the sake of doing a Kaizen event. I do it because I'm trying to solve a problem, identify a problem, and then figure out which lean tools, if any, can help you solve that problem. And what I'm hearing from you is kind of the same thing. Let's identify a problem. Let's identify something that we're trying to get done. And then let's think about whether or not AI and LLM, large language models, and so on, might have an application in that particular space. And if it does, then we can take that next step. So let's just say that I'm somebody that's reached that point. Where do I even start to think about or look for what that tool might be if I'm new to AI and I'm just trying to figure out how I can take the data that I have, a problem I want to solve, and go to work on solving it using an AI platform?
I'm going to have an engineering kind of answer, which means it depends. You know, what resources do you have internally, right? Do you have an engineering team? Do you have technical personnel? Do you have programmers? The good news is a lot of the skill sets that you need in order to be able to leverage AI are similar to what you needed to leverage the Web 2.0 and building apps and, programming and backend and so forth. It's engineering, right? It's programming. So the better you are, or the better your talent is in programming, the quicker you're going to have an entry point into that world. Now, another piece of good news is you actually don't have to know how to program that well. You just have to be somewhat technical, or have a certain technical affinity in order to get started with even a consumer facing ChatGPT and see what that can do for you. So it really depends on what are you trying to solve. It depends on what data you might already have yourself. It depends on if you have talent in-house that you can go to and brainstorm around this. Probably my first step would be find the most technical people in your organization and talk to them and see what they think about it. The second thing is just go play with the stuff that's out there. I mean, everybody at this point has heard about ChatGPT. Start playing with it and see what it tells you. And then, go into places like, Hugging Face and find out what Llama 2 is and find out what all the big tech companies like DeepMind and so forth are working on. Listen to this podcast, listen to a bunch of other podcasts that are talking about this topic. Look at what the top VC firms are investing in. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning, right? You like to look at what startups and small businesses and SMBs are doing across the board. A good way to see what's happening on the leading edge is going on some of the top VCs' websites, looking at their portfolios, looking at the AI section, and seeing what kinds of companies are being produced. At that stage, companies are just ideas. So you can go and just go idea shop, right? And I'm, of course, talking a little bit my own book here, but like go hit up those startups, right? Just send them I cannot tell you how much a startup founder will be excited about getting an inbound request. Hey, I've seen you guys do XYZ. We're interested in hearing about it. We're getting demo requests like this all the time. So, and that way you get to educate yourself on what's out there, and potentially you might find a partner who is really eager to please you and build the solution such that it solves your problem, and you get a discount because you're an early potential customer. So those are some of the angles that I would probably approach, depending on what problem you have, what talent you have, what you're trying to achieve, and so forth.
Yeah, I don't know what anybody else is doing tonight, but tonight I'm going to go and find 10 or 15 different venture capitalist websites and dive into the dive into the technology that they're investing in. I actually love that approach. It's one that hadn't occurred to me to just see what technologies are out there, what applications are out there, and then see how they might apply back to, to your point, a problem we're trying to solve, the data set we have available to us, the technical talent we have in our organization that might help us solve those problems. I think that's a phenomenal answer and a great approach, and one that I'll be taking advantage of myself. I'm glad we've taken advantage of all the time we've had together, Janai. Really good conversation, and we're running toward the end of our time here together. But I did want to squeeze in one last question for you, and it's one that we ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast. I do want to say that I learn many things about our guests every time they jump on the podcast. I had no idea that you were born in a refugee camp. It feels like that could be an entire episode in and of itself. But I want you to go back a little bit after that period of time, not too terribly far after that period of time, to your teenage years. You're a 15-year-old young man, just looking at your entire life ahead of you, figuring out where it is you want to go, what you want to accomplish. If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to that young individual, what would that piece of advice be?
Double down. Probably mostly on the on gut. I mean, it's funny because probably some of the better advice that I've gotten. It sounds so stupid and it sounds so cliche, but like in the right moment from the right person in a time when you're doubting yourself, and trust me, I doubt myself plenty. Um, the advice that I got was from a Fortune 200 CEO that said, and I was presenting a very large problem and sort of figuring out, and I was thinking, yeah, you probably have, some playbook that you learned in the Himalayas or whatever, some kung fu master, and it was just go with your gut. That was the advice that I got. So I think double down on your gut would be the advice that I would give myself. I think oftentimes I found myself thinking something, deep down and then waiting too long or overanalyzing multiple angles, et cetera, et cetera. It's also just part of my nature. And then, after a while seeing that I actually knew the answer way earlier than, and I just doubted myself too much. Which of course is part of a process, but I would say double down. But the other thing is I would either say that double down, or I would just, disappear again, because I'm pretty happy about my life. And I'm really excited about all the relationships that I made and all the connections that I've made along the way. And, now I get to talk with people like you, and I wouldn't change anything. So maybe if I doubled down, who knows where I'd be. So I better not mess with the past.
There's nothing wrong with being satisfied with where you are, but certainly that whole idea of, following your gut and then being willing to double down, or as sometimes we put it, being willing to bet on yourself, right? Being willing to say, I trust myself, I trust my future. I'm going to go all in on this thing. If it doesn't work out, I'll figure out another way. But if it does work out, it's incredible where we can end up. It's incredible where you've ended up, Janai. Just having this incredible opportunity to lead and run an organization like Ren, a great team of people, a small team now that we know is going to continue to grow. I really appreciate you taking some time to spend with us here on the Tech Ed Podcast, learning about you, learning about Ren. I'm a big fan, as you already know. But Canay Deniz has been our guest here on the Tech Ed Podcast. He is the co-founder and the chief executive officer of Ren. Just a great conversation, and can't thank you enough, Canay, for sharing your time with us here this afternoon.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate all you do. Thank you.
Did this episode pique your interest in Ren? If so, head to techedpodcast.com/Ren, where you can get started. There is an exclusive offer waiting for the listeners of the Tech Ed Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, and if you like this episode, share it with a friend. New episodes launch every Tuesday, so listen in next week.